Hello, and welcome back to an ongoing series in which I take characters from your favorite games, movies, anime, and other media, and by process of investigation and logic, try to figure out what class they would be in D&D. In this episode, we're going to pierce the very heavens with our drill, kick reason to the curb, and do the impossible, because that's how Team Gurren rolls. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, then you may not be familiar with Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann, possibly my favorite anime of all time. And it's a story about pushing past the limits of what's possible and fighting for what you believe in, no matter what it takes. Also giant robots and epic fight scenes. It's a phenomenal series, full of action, laughs, romance, and suspense, and if you haven't seen it, then I strongly urge you to check it out. But for those of you who have seen it, then you are likely going to appreciate that the character we're going to be analyzing today is none other than the badass leader of Team Gurren, the man of indomitable spirit, the paragon of masculinity. Oh yeah, we're talking about the one and only Kamina of Jiha Village. And this is your spoiler warning. This video will contain massive spoilers for Gurren Lagann. So if you haven't seen this amazing anime and you want to save the surprises for yourself, then please add this video to your watch later list and continue watching another time. You have been warned. So, Kamina of Team Gurren. Here is a character who breaks the mold. He literally is the personification of pushing past limits and making the impossible possible. But that alone doesn't really tell us anything about what D&D class he might be. In order to figure that out, we're going to have to take a look at his arsenal, fighting style, and how he navigates non-combat situations. So let's look at his weapon choices, shall we? Kamina, who is clearly a very athletic person, apparent by his lean yet muscular build, typically fights his battles up close with a nodachi he stole from the chief of his village before escaping to the surface in the first episode. It's more like he confiscated it really, but for those who are unsure, a nodachi is the longest of the traditional Japanese blades, or katanas. We see him wield this sword with great proficiency, but more often than using it for combat, he almost uses it more like a prop, holding it high above his head or carrying it over his shoulder to lead with dramatic flair. My favorite is when he uses the sword to threaten enemies who are clearly impervious to swords. It's all about the bravado with Kamina. Outside of the sword, we do see Kamina use a small handgun, and despite not using such a weapon more than once, he demonstrates an aptitude with it all the same. In the same scene where he uses the gun, we also get to see him pull out a sneak attack in the middle of combat with a concealed arrow. But just like the gun, we never actually see him do this again. But so far, we've painted the picture of an individual who prefers close and personal one-on-one melee fights with bladed weapons, who is also not above pulling sneak attacks with shiv-like weapons or small projectiles. I would describe this fighting style as haphazard. Kamina is clearly quick on his feet, not necessarily prepared for a fight, but ready to throw down either way, which is kind of a parallel to the theme of doing the impossible, so that's fun. Kamina, among many others in the series, also pilots a large mech fighter known as a gunman, or ganman. It depends on which dub you're watching. Doesn't matter. This actually becomes the primary fighting style of Kamina once he figures out how to control the device. Every gunman comes with different weapons and abilities, but Kamina's gunman, known as Gurren, which later combines with Simon's gunman to become Gurren Lagann, fights very differently to how we see Kamina fight. It uses a barrage of big wind-up strikes, brute forcing its way to victory, and usually finishing off enemies with flashy attacks involving drilling into and exploding them. It's pretty cool. We in fact actually don't get to see many characters fight without a gunman in this series, the exceptions being Kamina, Simon, Yoko, Viral, Lord Genome, and the Anti-Spiral. But it's interesting to consider that of these characters, they all fight very differently inside a gunman to how they would on their own. I'm not sure what to do with this information though, it's just interesting I guess. The point I want to gear toward, though, is that determining a character's D&D class based on how they operate a large piece of machinery is not really fair. I would even go as far as to say the gunman's unique fighting styles are just that, unique to the gunman. As we see Gurren operated by multiple drivers over the course of the series, and while some are clearly better pilots than others, the gunman still exercises the same fighting style regardless. So Kamina may be the original pilot for Gurren, but his fighting style is very much his own. Similarly to our Power Rangers episode in this series, we didn't consider the utility of the unique Megazords for determining their D&D classes, so we won't be considering the Gunman either. Now, we've considered Kamina's weapon choices and fighting style, but what about how he navigates the day-to-day? What skills does he use when dealing with people? What non-combat traits does he carry for navigating tasks like talking to others, surviving in the wild, or scouting threats? Over the course of the series, most of Kamina's interactions with others involve a lot of pep talks and showy speeches. He's encouraging to others, and this snowballs into instilling confidence in himself. He believes in his brother Simon so much, and Simon believes in him, and Kamina interprets this as a rationale to believe in himself. If it sounds like this philosophy goes in circles, it's because it does. Repeatedly, Kamina tells Simon, "Believe in the me that believes in you." And while Simon may not fully understand it right away, he eventually learns that it means, if you truly believe in me, then you believe in my judgment. And if my judgment is to believe in you, then you should believe in yourself by proxy. It's actually an incredibly inspiring and motivational mindset, and Kamina leads with this way of thinking. In a few brief moments of vulnerability, we do get to see Kamina confess he's not as confident as he likes to let on, going on to say he's full of empty bravado and doesn't really believe everything that comes out of his own mouth. But he further explains that watching Simon persevere in the face of adversity, Simon, who reveres him as the most capable and trusted person in his life, fills him with the confidence he needs to lead and give the same level of reverence and trust in return. Kamina handles almost all situations with tremendous confidence, and puts most of his energy into giving that confidence to others. When meeting new people, whether they be friend or foe, he never hides, choosing instead to reveal himself loudly and with as much spectacle as he can. This ultimately leads to many situations where the team is put in great danger. All things considered, confident as he is, Kamina actually makes a number of decisions that could be considered nearsighted at best. But if nothing else, you can be sure Kamina will always be honest about what he wants and what he's trying to achieve. When his poor decisions come back to bite him, he answers by taking on whatever threats come his way head on. He doesn't ask questions, he knows what he needs to do, and he just acts. Dire as situations get, he always makes others feel safe, and instills them with the confidence needed to do their part as well, even if that part is to just believe in doing the impossible. Apart from being a well of confidence, Kamina is also prone to outbursts of rage, usually over small, unimportant matters, as well as occasionally succumbing to feelings of grief or anguish. One thing to note about him is it seems like whatever emotion Kamina feels at any given time, he feels with great intensity. So how does this interpret into D&D? I feel like the direction I'm heading in here is kind of obvious, so I'm just gonna come out and say it, though I will explain in more detail. But I believe with absolute certainty, if Kamina were any class in D&D, he would have to be a bard. Most of what I have mentioned so far about Kamina has been a textbook example of what makes a bard. Bards in D&D are characterized as being able to influence other people's ways of thinking to their advantage, as well as granting their teammates buffs and other advantages in combat. And while it is a stereotype that bards utilize a musical instrument or have some singing ability, this isn't necessarily the case, and it is in fact enough that Kamina speaks with the flair and pull of a storyteller, which he does. Throughout the adventure, we see Kamina utilize proficiencies in persuasion, deception, intimidation, and performance, and these are very popular among bards. Maybe not intimidation, but that's just how he plays, really. Every weapon we see Kamina use, from the Nodachi to the pistol, are all within the realm of what you might see a typical bard make use of inside combat, but more prevalent than any weapon choice is Kamina's use of vicious mockery. For those less aware, Vicious Mockery is the bard cantrip, in which the user hurls insults at a target, resulting in weakening them and dealing psychic damage. And Kamina does this with almost every enemy he faces. Now, am I trying to say that Kamina has psychic powers? Not at all. I think what is implied by the psychic damage is that insults are going to harm the target's mental state, albeit in a small way. But if it's enough to throw them off their game, then Kamina is going to try. It doesn't matter to him how much bigger the foe is, or how stacked against him the odds are. He's going to stand front and center and hurl verbal abuse at anyone, Just try and tell me the guy whose first move in every fight is vicious mockery isn't a bard. You would be wrong. Apart from that evidence, we see Kamina fall into other bard stereotypes, like being a flirt and occasionally a perv, and even pursuing a romantic relationship with Yoko before he meets his tragic end in the battle against Thimilf. But even in his dying moments, we see him use Heroism, another bard spell, to reinforce in Simon a sense of bravery and inner strength so they could go on to win that fight. And just like with Vicious Mockery, anytime Kamina has the opportunity, we see him use this spell, and usually on Simon. But is he really casting these spells? I mean, we never see him waving a spell focus around or chanting incantations, though he does do a lot of finger pointing. Is this not just him being a great support to his teammates? Surely a paladin or a monk could do the same thing, right? But they don't. While in a roleplay sense your druid could actually be very supportive to their teammates, that alone doesn't turn the tide of battle. No, at the end of the day, only a bard can make so much difference with mere words and indomitable spirit. If you watch the anime, you can see that Kamina's words are clearly his strongest weapon, even more so than his gunmen. And whether they be used to bring down his enemies or to build up his allies, it's his first move every time. And after he dies, you see how differently battles go. The entire team struggles, losses are more consistent, and bouncing back from failure takes longer, if it happens at all. And while this is a realistic aftermath to losing someone you care about, the correlation of losing the party bard is there as well. So there you have it. With a great deal of certainty, I would determine that Kamina must be a bard, whose haphazard fighting style revolves around close-up melee fights involving sneak attacks, but whose greatest weapon is in fact the confidence he instills in his party members via heroism and bringing down his enemies with vicious mockery. A bard with expertise in persuasion, intimidation, and deception, and with maxed out charisma. Kamina is a great many things. A hero, an inspiration, a philosophy about self-confidence. Whatever you think of him as, though, doesn't change the fact he is for all intents and purposes a character we definitely wanted to see more of, whose untimely death was something the show needed to teach us its moral, but came at the cost of broken hearts and likely quite a bit of outrage. Kamina is one of my favorite characters, and making this video was really enjoyable for me. If you enjoyed me covering Kamina and figuring out what class he would be in D&D, then please give the video a like, and consider subscribing to the channel as well. This channel is still pretty small, so your support would go a really long way. Even just one sub, or a like, or sharing the video with a friend helps me get seen and shows YouTube that you're waiting on more from my channel. On that note, if you can't wait for more, then you should probably hit the bell icon as well, and that way you'll get instant updates anytime there's a new upload, and then you don't have to miss out. As always, thank you so much for tuning in and making it all the way to the end of my video. Like I said, give the video a like, share with your friends, subscribe, and definitely comment your thoughts down below. Let me know what you think, whether you agree with my assessments or not, and suggest ideas you'd like to see in future videos as well. My name is Raggy Rog, and I will see you in the next video. Have a good one!